Thanks for checking out this movie review video. So this is for the 2007 French horror film Frontiers by Xavier Gens. And this was the one that I let people who are subscribers on my channel vote for, or actually it can really be anyone. If you don't know, I'm putting up polls once a month, and I think I've done every month for the past like 4 or 5 months. And I'm going to continue with that, where I'll have a certain, like 4 movies typically that I'm thinking about watching, and then I'll have whoever comes about the poll vote on it and let me know what they should do. So I had a bunch of French horror films that I was making sure I wanted to watch on Shudder, and then I had 4 that I was considering, and Frontiers was one of them. And through the poll, it won. I think it got a pretty decent amount. I think I got about like 50% maybe. So yeah, well done, and let's review Frontiers. Written and directed by Xavier Gens, who did films such as The Divide, which I did see and I enjoyed, The Crucifixion, Cold Skin, which I did see and didn't really enjoy, Budapest, and Hitman. Yes, the notorious PG-13 film Hitman. Look up the information on what really went down with that film for Xavier Gens. It was a nightmare for him, actually, and it was really this situation where he shot the film to be an R rating. Then the studio told him after he shot it, oh, this needs to be a PG-13, so you got to cut it down. And he was like, I can't. I shot it for an R. It's going to be terrible if it's PG-13. So he refused to do it, to cut it down to PG-13. So they brought in an outside editor to come in and cut it down to a PG-13. And he basically threw his hands up, stepped back from it, was like, this is not my film anymore. This is not my film. So I would be very interested to know, well, I haven't seen the PG-13 version because I heard it was terrible, but I'd be interested to see the R-rated version if that ever came out. Have a hard time believing that it would, though. But anyway, just a quick side note on that. It's just an example of how you have foreign directors who come over to the United States and, you know, get a shot in Hollywood, and some of the studios really just chew them up and spit them out. Because Xavier Gens is known for doing horror and gore, and for a studio to then get him to do a film and make it PG-13 makes no sense. Anyway, the film was supposed to premiere at Horror Fest, Frontiers that is. It was supposed to premiere at Horror Fest as part of one of those 8 films to die for, but ended up getting an NC-17 rating, so they pulled it and put a different film in, I guess. I actually own some of those 8 films to die for. I thought that was a really cool thing that they did. I think they only did it once, maybe a second year. But yeah, Frontiers was supposed to be one, but NC-17 rating, so they didn't do it, which I don't understand that. A, I don't understand the NC-17 rating, and B, I don't understand pulling it for being NC-17. I just don't get it. The film was banned in Thailand for violence, just saying. In the very beginning of this film, I had to roll my eyes because it starts with a sonogram, started giving me flashbacks to watching the film Inside, which with Inside, you can understand the use of all that stuff because it's basically about the pregnancy. With this film, there's some about pregnancy, but I always hate when that gets used in films because it's a very cheap way to kind of artificially increase someone's sympathy for a character or increase the stakes of a situation, and it's lazy cliche writing in my opinion. It even was back in 2007. So those types of things I hate. So as soon as I'm seeing a sonogram, I'm like, baby stuff. I'm like, come on, man. Let's be a little more original. But, I mean, it does have some impact within the film. Some. All the civil unrest being shown to open up sets the world stage for the film itself. But it also kind of reminded me of the beginning of the film Turkey Shoot, which if nobody's seen that Brian Trenchard Smith film, Turkey Shoot, definitely watch it. I think it's still on Shudder. It's wacky, and it's super, super fun. And, yeah, Olivia Hussey is in it as well. Great times. But anyway, yeah. I think that one of the things, going back to the pregnancy thing, that did kind of soften me a little bit on it as well, other than the fact that I said there is a little bit of impact from it in the film, is the fact that the main character, Yasmin, basically says that she is going to have an abortion because she doesn't want to bring her child into a world like this. And then we obviously see this montage that's showing how nuts the world is. It's basically showing like fascist crackdown and civil unrest in the streets. And you're supposed to get that feel, which is very much the same feel in Turkey Shoot. But yeah, so that kind of aspect of it spoke to me in a sense, because one of the reasons I have chosen not to have children and my wife is yeah, just not feeling like bringing a kid into a world that has as many problems as it does, because then they have to deal with this stuff eventually. And yeah, that's just one reason. It's one of many, but it's just my personal thing. When the actual film footage starts, it gets so shaky and the cuts are so quick that it's almost nausea-inducing. So I was like, please, let's not keep the film like this. But that was just mainly during the opening portion where all those guys were running from the police. It was, I guess it was Fareed, Tom, and Alex were running. And then Yasmin and Sammy were kind of a little bit separate. But yeah, just the camera work. It's like so shaky, so crazy. The cuts were so fast. I was like, I can't even focus on what's going on right now. I don't even know what's happening. So yeah, I'm glad that did not continue. But I think obviously that's done to kind of make it feel crazy, like hit the ground running and being like, oh my gosh, this is nuts, you know? So just saying. Knowing a bunch of the opening characters are criminals makes you believe they will help make up a portion of the film's body count, which obviously is the case because all the people who are criminals within it, except, I mean, it's kind of left up in the air like how involved Yasmin is. It seems more through the events of the film that she's just kind of like guilty by association, one of those types of things. Especially because Alex was her boyfriend, but I guess they kind of broke up because she's going to not keep the baby. I don't know. Like, there's a little bit that's kind of like left up in the air there, but all the people that you know are running from the police and criminals do end up becoming part of the body count. And really, it's just Yasmin that gets away because she seems to be the most pure, and the whole pregnancy thing also conveys purity. That's another thing that they do in film to convey purity, is someone being pregnant. Unless they have a new, interesting, nuanced take on that, which I welcome. I roll again when Sammy says to keep the baby before he dies. Yeah. Ridiculous. I just hate how they keep playing to this whole baby thing. But like I said, it does kind of like come back in the end, especially because she has this turnaround by the end of the film, which I'll talk about more later in this review, to say, oh, well, you know, maybe she doesn't say it, but you can tell that she's thinking it, that, oh, you know, maybe having the child wouldn't be too bad. And it's kind of like in comparison to what she just went through, the world doesn't look that bad. So you could see that. And that was kind of conveyed by her, like, placing her hand on her stomach when she was driving away at the end, all covered in blood. With all the shifty-looking people at the motel that they show up at, you get the strong idea that something's off there. It's not a surprise thing at all. I think it probably would have been a little more interesting and fun had Jens decided to kind of make these people that they run into, the Nazis, at first seem like very open and very welcoming, a la something like Motel Hell film. That would have been more interesting, but they're immediately shifty, they're immediately weird looking, and everything looks dirty and dark, and the way it's shot and the music and everything just says we're going somewhere crazy, there's going to be problems here. I would have just liked it to be a little more of a surprise, is all. The family dinner scene, well, there ends up being two of them, but the first family dinner scene really did remind me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, especially with the grandmother who is in the wheelchair and like basically unresponsive at the end of the table. I would be shocked if that portion is not inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I would be shocked if if this film in general is not inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because there is this cannibalism aspect to it as well. You know, like the aesthetic, a lot of kind of like the rural house, or in this case, motel, that is housing these cannibals, a whole family of them. Seem familiar? Yes, very much. It's got to be influenced by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There are a few overt hints that the motel is run by Nazis. There are certain things that they say, like bringing out, you know, the very kind of angry question about if Yasmin is Jewish when she gets there. And there was something else I'm trying to remember. Half-breed. The comment of half-breed that's said towards Fareed. That's another thing. And that just signals to you, okay, these people are at the least not very nice people, at the least racist, at the most Nazis, which they are. The drab blue outside when the kind of bit of escape happens, or the whole time if anyone's like driving outside, when it looks like a drab blue, it kind of looks like they filmed it during the day and then kind of tinted it later to make it look like it was like evening time, like dusk. I don't really like those looks in a film. It's kind of weird, but this was done a decent amount during this time period, I believe. And it doesn't look terrible. I just don't prefer it. I understand why you do it, because then you can get good lighting and then just kind of tint it enough to kind of change the time of day. And then that way you can just film everything in broad daylight and then just make it look like it's evening or night. Because actually filming in the evening is a very short time period, so it's really hard to get those types of shots. So I understand it. They make a point of showing you where the cell phone is being kept, so you kind of get the idea that it may end up coming up later. It didn't end up being as much of a big point as I thought it was going to end up being, but whenever they're kind of like showing you a close-up on something and where it's being placed, like a cell phone in this instance, you're kind of like, okay, someone's going to go for that, or they're going to try to get it, or they're actually going to get it. It's going to be more of a big thing. It's kind of like the whole Chekhov's gun thing, where it's like, if you see a gun in film, it's going to get used later. Like, that's why it's introduced. The bathroom Alex ends up going to when he and Yasmin first get there, the one that's kind of like outside as part of like the meat plant, or like the barn / meat plant. Very disgusting. It's probably the most disgusting bathroom I've ever seen in film, other than the one in Trainspotting. Actually, it's even more disgusting than the one in Trainspotting. The one in Trainspotting is so disgusting because of what happens in that scene with it. But yeah, I think this is the most disgusting bathroom. It was really gross. So good job making a bathroom look really nasty, Jens. Tom being hung up by the hook, hung up on hooks by his ankles was a pretty nasty thing, and I think that's kind of a good way to really start the violence and brutality in the film, of which there is plenty, obviously. I mean, that's kind of one of the big points. This whole movement, it was part of the French extremity movement. And yeah, this is one of the films that kind of popped out during that time and people pointed to as like, oh, okay, it was like this, Inside, High Tension, and Martyrs were, you know, the big ones. But yeah, the hooks through the ankle, something. With how meek Eva, the character Eva is, you get the idea that she's actually not going to be like the rest. Everyone's kind of like overtly mean acting and looking. Eva is more kind of like demure, like her body posture. She's always kind of like hunched over and like meek, like I was saying. And she just gives that vibe, especially with her voice, that she's going to be different. Like something else is going to happen with her in the film. And obviously it does, because she ends up saving the day with Yasmin later. And we realize that, you know, she was even there through her talking to Yasmin after she's actually captured and they were going to make her a bride to Carl, telling her that she was kidnapped and brought there, and that they said that if she does everything that she's needed to do, then her parents will come for her. So she's just been living for this promise that her parents are coming for her. But then when she has the chance to get away, she does not, because of her children, which I was hoping we would see more with these children, because when they're talked about, you get the idea that they're going to be shown and they're going to be like these crazy, freakish kids. Like it's going to be something out of like The Hills Have Eyes, the remake that is, like real crazy. But you don't get that payoff, and I just don't really understand that. You see a little bit, or like get the idea of it a little bit, when Fareed and Tom are kind of like crawling through that tunnel in the mine shaft, because that's where the kids are housed, you find out later. But we needed to see him. After knocking Fareed down, how does Hans end up missing with his shotgun? Because he was in very, very close range. I don't understand that. Like literally, Hans runs into Fareed. He hits him with like the butt of the gun in the head. He falls down. He doesn't fall that far back. And then Hans goes to shoot him. And you mean to tell me that Fareed is so fast that he can pop up and run, and Hans misses that shot when he was that close? Doesn't make any sense to me. The moment of Yasmin crying and telling Alex that she loves him before getting under the gate through all that like mud and I assume crap doesn't really have as much impact as was probably intended because of the fact that Alex hadn't been really endeared to the audience all that much. He's set up immediately as not a very good guy, as a criminal, and he doesn't really show much of any heart or any inkling of being like a good, decent person. So, like I said, he's not endeared to the audience. So when Yasmin is upset about leaving Alex, I mean, sure, you kind of like feel for her in that instance because that's the father of her child, and you know that she had feelings for him at least at some point, but for him, you're just kind of like, yeah, bye. So I don't understand why he wasn't created as a more sympathetic character because then that type of moment would have a lot more impact. Just saying. The Achilles tendon cutting that happens to Alex is an intense scene. I like it. I think it's well done. But I guarantee it was taken from the film Hostel. And I guarantee that when Eli Roth put it in Hostel, he took it from the Chan-wook Park film Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. So if you want to see the kind of metamorphosis of this type of move in a film, or this torture technique in a film, watch it in Frontiers, they'll go watch it in the first Hostel, and then go watch it in Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. Because I'm pretty sure that's how they got the ideas. When Yasmin gets picked up by Getz, it's one of those moments the audience members yell at the screen because they know who he is. I'm referring to when she's running outside because she gets away and then she comes across him in the car and it's just like, oh, I need a ride. And she had not seen him prior to this. So it's a good moment for that reason because then the audience is just like, oh my God, no. Because the audience knows what's coming. They know what he's capable of, where he's taking her. But she has no idea. I like those moments. Those are impactful. Eva's story about her children let you know that you'll end up seeing the feral spawn later, but that's what I wrote down at the time, but guess what? Didn't pay off for me. I needed the feral spawn. I needed it. Where, like, you know how Joe Bob Briggs on The Last Drive-In had done, where's the chud? Where's the feral spawn? That's what I'm saying. I feel like the introduction of the family pecking order at the dinner table should only be the setup for dissent that unravels everything later, and exactly what happened. Like, you could tell with that setup happening where, you know, the father, I think they just call him the father, actually, the head Nazi old guy, was saying that, you know, the only son I'm proud of, Carl, he's going to be basically the patriarch of this family when I'm dead and gone. And then you obviously see like Getz and Hans being really upset about it. And my thought at the time was like, there's only one reason to do this. And that's because then the family dynamic starts to unravel and then they turn on each other. And that does obviously end up happening. And that creates some distraction at times in a very weird way, I will say. Like when Yasmin is facing off against Getz before she ends up getting the upper hand and killing him. He's so focused on this whole family pecking order situation and Carl being picked above him that he's not paying attention to her. So it's dumb, in my opinion, because being the person that he is and the person that he has been in this film up until that point, he would have been pretty focused on taking care of the task at hand, which is killing Yasmin or at least imprisoning her again. And the fact that he's so focused on just like ranting and raving about how Carl was chosen and not him doesn't even seem realistic for his character. So I don't like that about the film. I think it's pretty weak, in my opinion. It just kind of seemed like a lazy way to get him off guard so that Yasmin could kill him. You can come up with much better ways, in my opinion. The family is pretty stupid to allow Yasmin access to knives, because obviously they end up dearly paying for it, as Hans gets killed at that point, I believe, and so does the father. So, just another thing that was like, I don't think this family would have done that. Like, yes, they want her to be a part of the family, but she hasn't been indoctrinated at this point. She hasn't been even with them that long. So they wouldn't have any level of trust with her, like any level of trust. So for her to be sat at the table with a very sharp knife within reach, does not make any sense. There's a bunch of like does not make sense stuff in this film. Carl's head explosion has got to be the best part of the film. Love it, love it, love it. When he gets nailed with the shotgun by Eva, pretty awesome. Love, love, love that moment. Head explosions in films in the first place are usually pretty surprising, and if they look good like they do in this, all for it. Gotta love it when villains indiscriminately shoot and never even come close to hitting their target. I'm talking about the scene where Claudia and Gilberta are facing off against Yasmin, who only has a shotgun, and they have like automatic weapons, and they're just like shooting. They're not even shooting, like they know that she went and was like on the ground hiding behind something, and they're shooting up. They're shooting like mid-level and up at like all these things on shelves. It makes no sense. That happens in film a lot, though. Like I said, like villains indiscriminately just shooting is a thing that happens in films. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. Only just that they're super stupid. But that kind of goes along with how the characters have been throughout a lot of the film. Just kind of dumb. I don't know if that was a writing out of convenience thing or if it was an intentional thing for their characters. The amount of times that the villains pause before attempting to kill someone is also ridiculous. This goes back to, I think, convenience of writing, just to be able to allow characters to either get away or to fight back or actually kill them. Another thing I don't like about the film, honestly, because if these people are as good at this as you would think, based off of the gigantic amount of bodies hanging from the ceiling in that one room. They've obviously been doing this for quite a while and have the skills. They've been doing it for a while. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense that they would be this inept all of a sudden. It's ridiculous. It appears in the end that Yasmin is more interested in having her baby since she holds her stomach. I guess her ordeal taught her that the world's not so bad in comparison to what it could have been. And what I mean by could have been, it's she's reminded that had Germany and the Third Reich won World War II, you would have been living under Nazi rule. Everyone would have been living under Nazi rule, potentially, at least in France in this instance. And I think that kind of got to her and was just like, man, okay, the world's crappy, but it could be way crappier because it could have been those people in charge. This film has a lot of, I'm sorry, not a lot, a little bit of a folk horror element to it because of the whole thing where it's like city folks against rural folks. That is one of the big things within folk horror is kind of like danger and evil from that are closer to nature, like more out in a rural setting. So a bit, I'm saying a bit. I wouldn't classify this as a folk horror film, but it's got a little bit of like a dash of folk horror to it because a lot of times in folk horror it ends up being like city against rural. So that's pretty interesting. I feel like you could view this film as a metaphor for assimilation of people into society, which strips them of who they actually are. In this instance, you can tell that the characters who end up getting killed, plus Yasmin, are people who have come from other countries, at least maybe not, first generation, but like their parents have come from other countries, have immigrated into France. And for that reason, I kind of view this as like the whole assimilation thing, that when you have to assimilate into a society because that's your new home, you kind of end up losing a lot of who you are. Now, that's obviously shown with what the family's trying to do, who runs the Frontiers Motel, which that's what it's called. That's why it's called Frontiers Motel. I don't understand like the parentheses with the S, but maybe someone can enlighten me on that. Put it in the comments. But yeah, so they're trying to assimilate people into their bloodline, which also actually doesn't really make sense to me from a Nazi standpoint, because Nazis were all about like pure blood, and to then take on people who they know are not in their estimation, like Yasmin, potentially Eva, I don't know. It doesn't make sense because then they're diluting the gene pool. They're diluting the pure blood. So that doesn't make sense to me. But ignoring that, putting that aside, they actually are trying to assimilate people who they don't like people who are Jewish and such. So yeah, and that's seen in, you know, taking on, trying, or at least trying to take on Yasmin and make her a wife, and they even talk about like her kind of becoming pure blood, which I don't really understand that whole thing. I think there's, you know, some kind of plot holes in this. But anyway, that's all my thoughts on the film. If you want to tell me your feelings, good, bad, in between, go ahead and put it in the comments. Maybe just give me like a sentence or two about what you actually do or don't like about it. Would be very interested to know. So out of 5 stars with half stars in play, it's decent. I was between 3 and 3.5 stars, but I think I'm just going to go with 3 stars because it didn't really grab me a whole lot. The story's relatively basic. It's really more about the brutality than anything, which, you know, it's from its time period. Like, that was the thing back in 2007. Well, early 2000s. That was kind of a big thing, especially with all those French extremity films. But yeah, 3 stars. Do me a quick favor, hit subscribe if you haven't already. That is your way to repay me if you like this video or any video I have ever done. And it keeps me motivated. It is quick, it is painless, it costs you nothing. So please just do it. It's really quick. Also hit the notification bell button because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm putting up 4 a week at this point, which I think is pretty solid. But regardless, I really do thank you for taking your time to watch this video. And until next time, keep it brutal.